5 friends, eager for adventure. An old mountain, shrouded in darkness. Red Hollow Mountain loomed, a silent giant against the setting sun.
They were young, full of life, ready to conquer the trails.
Mark the leader grinned with excitement.
Sarah, his sister, clutched her map, a knot of unease in her stomach.
There was Ben, the jokester, trying to lighten the mood.
Emily, quiet and observant, scanned the woods.
And then there was Chris, always the cautious one, who felt a chill crawl down his spine as they crossed the threshold of the forest.
The air grew heavy, the sunlight struggling to penetrate the dense canopy. Twilight painted the forest in shades of gray and black. The once vibrant foliage now felt oppressive, each rustle of leaves a whispered threat.
They set up camp by a murky creek, the water a black mirror reflecting their anxieties.
They built a fire, the flames a meager defense against the encroaching darkness.
Jokes and laughter felt forced, the silence between them thick with unspoken dread.
As the last embers of the fire died down, the true nature of the mountain revealed itself. The first sign was the howling, a mournful, chilling sound that echoed through the valley. It wasn't the howl of wolves, this was something ancient, something hungry.
Then they found the bones, picked clean and scattered around their campsite.
Small animals, squirrels, rabbits, their tiny skulls grinning up at the starless sky. Fear turned their blood to ice.
Sarah pointed to strange symbols carved into a nearby tree, the bark black with what looked disturbingly like dried blood.
The wind picked up, carrying with it whispers that seemed not of this world. Sleep offered no escape. Nightmares plagued them, filled with images of glowing eyes and jagged teeth.
When morning finally came, it brought no comfort.
The creatures emerged from the woods as the sun began to set. Tall, skeletal figures, their skin stretched thin over bones, their eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. They moved with an unnatural grace, their limbs contorting at impossible angles.
They carried crude weapons, bones sharpened to razor points, dripping with a viscous black fluid.
The first attack was swift and brutal. Ben, caught unaware, dragged screaming into the darkness. His cries cut short, replaced by the sickening crunch of bone.
Panic seized the group.
They scattered, adrenaline the only thing keeping them upright. The creatures moved like phantoms, appearing and disappearing at will, their laughter echoing through the trees, a chorus of death.
Mark, trying to protect Sarah, was the next to fall, a spear of bone piercing his chest.
His last breath a gasp of surprise and terror. Emily, her face streaked with tears and dirt, stumbled through the undergrowth. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each step a struggle as the dense forest seemed to close in around her. The branches clawed at her clothes, and the roots seemed to reach out to trip her. She could feel the weight of the night pressing down on her, the darkness almost tangible. The forest floor was slick with blood, the air thick with the metallic scent of death. It was as if the very ground was crying out in pain, the blood seeping into the earth like a dark, twisted offering. The eerie atmosphere was suffocating. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking danger, every rustle of leaves a potential threat.
She could hear the creatures closing in, their excited cries sending shivers down her spine. The sounds were getting closer, a cacophony of growls and snarls that seemed to echo through the trees. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of the precious seconds slipping away. She knew she had to keep moving, but her legs felt like lead.
A root snagged her foot and she fell, the breath knocked out of her. The impact was jarring, pain shooting through her body as she hit the ground. She lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented, the world spinning around her. The forest seemed to close in, the darkness pressing down like a suffocating blanket. She lay there, paralyzed by fear, as a shadow fell over her. The darkness seemed to deepen, the shadow growing larger and more menacing. She could feel the presence looming over her, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to drain the very life from the air. Her mind raced, 1,000 thoughts and fears colliding in a chaotic whirl. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the end. Her body trembled, every muscle tensed in anticipation of the inevitable. She could hear her own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat in the silence. The seconds stretched into an eternity, each one a lifetime of fear and dread. But the end didn't come. The silence stretched on, the expected blow never landing. Slowly, she dared to open her eyes, her heart still pounding in her chest. The world came back into focus, the shadows retreating just enough to reveal the figure standing over her.
She cautiously opened her eyes to see Chris, his face a mask of grim determination, standing over her, a bloodied rock in his hand. His clothes were torn, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his eyes were clear and focused. He looked like a warrior, battle-worn but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next.
He offered her a hand up, his voice a strained whisper. "We have to keep moving," he said, his tone urgent but gentle. She took his hand, feeling the strength in his grip, the reassurance in his touch. Together, they stood, the weight of the night still pressing down on them, but now they faced it together.
We have to keep moving. The words echoed in her mind, a mantra that gave her the strength to push forward. They ran through the dark forest, their footsteps a desperate rhythm in the night. The creatures were still out there, but now they had each other, and that made all the difference.
They ran until their lungs burned and their legs screamed for rest. The forest seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness pressing in on them. They stumbled upon a narrow, almost invisible path leading down the mountain. It was their only chance. They scrambled down the treacherous path, the sound of the creature's howls echoing behind them. The path was slick with moss and fallen leaves, every step a gamble. Chris, his eyes darting from shadow to shadow, pulled Emily along, urging her forward.
Almost there, he gasped, pointing to a faint light in the distance.
The light led to a small cave, hidden behind a curtain of vines. It was a place they had stumbled upon by sheer luck, a sanctuary that seemed almost too good to be true. The vines hung thick and heavy, creating a natural barrier that shielded them from the outside world. They collapsed inside, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and fear. The journey had been long and treacherous, and every step had been a battle against the elements and the creatures that roamed the night. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. They huddled together, listening to the sounds of the hunt outside. The growls and snarls of the creatures echoed through the night, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked just beyond the safety of the cave. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. But the creatures did not follow. It was as if an invisible barrier kept them at bay, a line they dared not cross. The cave seemed to possess a protective aura, a sanctuary in the heart of darkness that offered them a brief respite from the relentless pursuit. It was as if the cave was protected, a sanctuary in the heart of darkness. The walls seemed to hum with an ancient energy, a force that repelled the evil outside. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, they allowed themselves to hope. As the first rays of dawn pierced the cave entrance, they knew they couldn't stay. The light brought with it a sense of urgency, a reminder that their time in this safe haven was limited. They had to move, to find a more permanent refuge before the creatures regrouped. They had to get off the mountain. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers they could only imagine. But staying was not an option. They gathered their meager belongings, steeling themselves for the journey ahead. But as they turned to leave, Chris cried out, clutching his leg. The sound of his pain echoed through the cave, a stark contrast to the silence that had enveloped them moments before. Panic set in as they realized the gravity of the situation. A deep gash oozed with blood, the telltale black venom already spreading through his veins. The wound was fresh, a cruel reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. They had no time, no resources to treat such a grievous injury. He looked at Emily, his eyes filled with a terrible knowledge. He knew what the venom meant, what it would do to him. There was no cure, no hope for survival. His fate was sealed, and he accepted it with a grim determination.
"Go," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't look back." His words were a final plea, a desperate attempt to save the others. He knew they had to leave him behind, to continue their journey without him. It was the only way they stood a chance of surviving.
Tears streamed down Emily's face as she left Chris behind. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The image of his resigned smile, the acceptance of his fate, fueled her flight. She ran, fueled by a primal need to survive. The descent was a blur of pain and terror. The creature's cries seemed to follow her, their laughter echoing in her ears. She didn't stop, not until she stumbled out of the forest's edge, the rising sun painting the sky in hues of blood orange and bruised purple. She had escaped. But the mountain had claimed its due. They found her at the foot of Red Hollow Mountain, babbling incoherently, her clothes torn and her skin scratched by the unforgiving wilderness. She was a sight to behold, a living testament to the horrors she had faced. Her eyes wide with a terror that would never leave her, they seemed to hold the weight of 1,000 untold stories, each more horrifying than the last. The fear in her eyes was not just for what she had seen, but for what she knew was still out there. They dismissed her tale as hysteria, the ramblings of a mind broken by trauma. They couldn't fathom the reality of her experience, choosing instead to believe in the safety of their ignorance. The villagers turned away, uninterested in the ravings of a woman they deemed mad. They whispered among themselves, creating a narrative that suited their need for normalcy, ignoring the chilling truth she tried to convey. But Emily knew the truth. She had seen what lay beyond the veil of the ordinary, a world where nightmares were real and the darkness had a life of its own. She had looked into the abyss, a void so deep and dark that it seemed to swallow the light itself. In that moment, she felt a connection to something ancient and malevolent, and the abyss had looked back. It was as if the darkness had eyes, watching her, understanding her deepest fears, and in its depths, she had seen the reflection of a hunger that would never be satisfied, a primal, insatiable need that lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. The mountain kept its secrets, shrouded in shadow and mystery. It stood as a silent guardian of the horrors it concealed, its peaks reaching into the sky like the claws of a beast, and soaked in the blood of the unwary. The ground itself seemed to whisper of the lives it had claimed, a grim reminder of the price of curiosity. And Emily, forever haunted by the memory of that night, could never escape the images that played over and over in her mind. The screams, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. It was all too real. Was left to carry the burden of the truth, a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. She walked alone, her steps echoing the silence of those who refused to listen. A story too horrifying to be believed. It was a tale that defied logic and reason, a nightmare that lived in the spaces between reality and imagination. And so, the story remained untold, locked away in the depths of Emily's haunted mind.